All right, hello everybody, and welcome to the first live stream session of Azure Back to School this week. And today we have a great session on Azure Virtual Desktop and Windows 365 from Jake Walsh and John Jarvis. So please, feel free to take a look at, and enjoy this session. And if you want to know any future sessions, we do have a couple, this live stream and another one in an hour today, but you can find the full schedule at azurebackToschool.github.io. But without further delay, let me turn it over to Jake and John for their session. Thanks, guys, for your contribution and being part of this event.
Awesome. Thank you. Great to be here. I'll just move the slides forward. Yeah, obviously I've included links to to the Azure Back to School elements, but just yeah, thank you for having us. It's a pleasure to be here. But please do check out azureback2school.github.io and obviously youtube.com/@azureback2school. There's some amazing sessions coming up, loads of great content, and yeah, pleasure to be here. Let me just zip this forward. So quick intro. Hello, I'm Jake Walsh. I'm a Senior Solution Architect for CDW UK. I'm on social media, all the various channels, JakeWalsh90, and I blog a little bit at jakewalsh.co.uk. I'll hand over to my colleague, John.
Yeah, congratulations. That's a new job title since
Thank you.
But yeah, hi. My name's John Jarvis. I'm a Principal Architect at Sicilian, Microsoft MVP. Under Windows 365. So yeah, hi, nice to see you.
So just a few key points, I guess, what we're going to cover off today. So a brief bit of background, really, sort of covering AVD and Windows 365 and overview some of the key differences. We'll go into why you would use code-driven deployment. What's the reason we've kind of come here and done this presentation, and deploying in code is the reason behind that. So just going to sort of talk about some of the methodologies and some of the benefits and that sort of stuff. We'll talk about tooling, talk about a few of the ways to get started with the tooling and the things you'll need as well. Cover off those methodologies in a bit more detail. So just going into a few elements, cover off some tips, show some code samples, and then some resources to share, hopefully, just to give background and kind of set the scene and make it so this is an easy thing to get started with. I'll hand over to you, John.
Yeah, so AVD and Windows 365. I don't know if everyone was like me a couple of years back. It was Inspire, I think 2020. So I think it was like roughly in the midst of COVID and lockdown. Windows 365 was announced, and everyone thought, another virtual desktop platform. Why do we need that? Certainly, like, put my hand up. That's what I was thinking. Like, what's the key differences? And for months and months and months, I felt that messaging was quite mixed and why to use it and stuff. So we look at kind of what is Windows 365. We'll look into what's AVD, why to use each one, and we'll go from there. So Windows 365, it's a desktop as a service platform. So it's a cloud PC that is up in Microsoft's cloud, in whichever data center that you choose when you configure and create your provisioning policies. So it can be, again, like AVD, as small as you like, as high as you like. And you pay per license, per user, per month. So we are not paying for the computer, we are paying for the computing power, we're not paying the computing power per minute, per hour, etc. We are paying one license, so it's a fixed cost per cloud PC, per user, per month. Every user has their own cloud PC, and it's a personal PC. It's not pooled, and every time that they access that cloud PC, it's exactly how they left it. So that's kind of the main driver for Windows 365. And what you'll see with Windows 365 and what Microsoft's ultimate goal is no more kind of like having to buy high-end, high-spec PCs anymore, laptops and stuff. Is to be able to string a cloud PC experience from anywhere in the world. So I think actually yesterday they announced a Windows 365 enhanced experience. Basically, it's a new application within the Motorola on Android, and you can, is it Motorola? Yes, Motorola, isn't it? And basically you plug it straight into a monitor and you stream your cloud PC straight from your mobile phone into the monitor. It looks really cool. Pity it's on Motorola and not on anything else. I've been shouting for an iOS one of that. That'd be pretty cool. But yeah, it's just a brand new release yesterday, and that's the kind of thing that Microsoft is looking for in the future, to be able to have that streaming experience, like Netflix, like Disney Plus, like Amazon Prime, that subscription-based model for basically everything. But the cloud PC is obviously top of the business. In the last year, we are certainly seeing a big bridge in the gap between AVD and Windows 365. Scott Manchester, who's the main head honcho at Microsoft, who looked over after AVD, now looks after both products, and the product teams are actually, I believe, merging. So you're seeing a lot more things come out in Windows 365 that were in AVD, etc., etc. And there's two different deployment choices. So we've got the business deployment and the enterprise deployment. So the business deployment is up to 300 users. And basically what you can do with that, you license your user for a Windows 365 business PC, and it just goes off and spins it up. There's nothing else that needs to be done, no configuration, no customization whatsoever. It goes and just spins up a PC. And this is what I kind of envision will happen for in the future when it goes to consumer, when it goes to home, if it goes to home use. I'm not saying it is, if it does go to home use. No, there's nothing I know about that. But that's what I assume will happen in the future. But the enterprise deployment, that's where we create our provisioning policies. That's where we customize things. That's where we put things into Microsoft Intune, where we can actually put in all of the settings catalogs. We can put in all of the different AVD antivirus options, EDR options, anything that you think of in Intune, it can be configured at that point there within Windows 365 Enterprise. I've already mentioned it quite a few times at the bottom, but the fixed price model. Some companies actually find it a lot easier to manage their costs, unlike AVD, where it could be up and down each month, and we don't know what the set budget is. We can have a set budget for Windows 365. And with some of the discounts now that Microsoft are offering for multiple cloud PCs, it actually starts to bring the price down. You start to see some discounts of up to 30 to 40%, depending on the amount of cloud PCs that you're actually deploying. So it's definitely worth, if you're a customer of Microsoft, speaking to an account manager, speaking to a partner, and figuring out if there is any type of discount when it comes to that. Next one, please, Jake. So Windows 365 use cases. So again, small to medium businesses who don't have a large IT team, in my opinion. So I've come across many over the last couple of years, and who've asked for AVD, and then when we start to kind of dive down and figure out exactly what they need, it's probably Windows 365 that's best off for them. So if they've got one or two people in their IT team, you don't really, and you've got a use case for 20 to 30 people to use a cloud PC, a virtual desktop, etc. Sometimes Windows 365 does actually end up being a bit more cost effective, especially if you're looking at C-level and board level staff members who just want a cloud PC there, ready for them, waiting ASAP, on the flash, on the go, wherever they are. So that's kind of like where we've propositioned it in the past. And you can see they're really good for, it should be Intune integration now. We need to Intune integration, and absolutely perfect for that. Use cases, contractors, seen that quite a lot of times when we've got a churning rate of contractors. Again, it could be, I've seen up to a use case for up to 100 before. Contractors on the go all the time. They want to bring your own device, but it's easy just to go into a Windows 365 PC and have everything sitting there waiting for them. Facilitate training and BCP and DR as well. Perfect use cases. Also worth mentioning, Windows 365 Frontline. For me, absolute brilliant tool and brilliant use of Windows 365 for shops, hospitals, GP surgeries, anything kind of like that, where we may have people that are on shift work who may need a PC for 3 hours out of the day, and then or 6-7 hours, but then as soon as they clock off, somebody else is kind of taking their place on that 24/7 on that 24/7 rota. How can even like there might be like opportunities there for like IT help desks who are like doing 24/7 rotas for like a SOC or something like that. I don't know, possible. But frontline, and what that enables, it enables companies to split that Windows 365 license between 3 different people. So if there's a 3 people rota there over 24 hours, 3 people can use one Windows 365 frontline license. One logs off, the other one logs on, etc., etc. I think there's some grace period that for some type of overlap coming. I don't know if it's in place yet, but if there's any type of overlap, yeah, I think absolutely a really good use case there. We've also got Windows 365 boot. That's in public preview now. It's in public preview, which enables old devices such as if you've got an old Lenovo, old HP, and you don't really want to refresh the hardware, use those old devices to log straight into Windows 365 boot, and it goes up so quick. So brilliant. And Windows 365 switch, so you can switch from local PC to cloud PC in absolute seconds. So again, good couple of use cases, new features that are coming out all the time, and yeah, there we go. Okay, next one. So AVD. So what is AVD? So I think I've said it quite a few times, but AVD is the virtual desktop solution that is offered using Microsoft Azure. So unlike Windows 365, where Windows 365, Microsoft look after the landing zone, everything, the network behind it, the virtual machines all behind it. AVD is a little bit more granular, right, Jake?
Exactly that. Yep. So obviously you can deliver Windows 10, 11 server desktops apps from any region. Obviously much more customizable in the sense of integrations to your own Azure environment, all of that sort of stuff. Obviously some options there as well around built-in security using the wider Azure platform. Probably one of the other things that's of interest to people who are working with AVD in particular is some of the options around deployment and scaling. So, the ability to deploy in multiple regions, perhaps reuse existing licensing, spin up quickly. More on that later with some of our code-based approach. But obviously there's
you can do a lot of that with Windows 365 as well.
You can. There is a lot of parity now. Yeah,
the integration with the Azure platform, so you can use an ANC when it comes to Windows 365 to bring into your own landing zone. So you can manage. It's not best practice, whereas Windows with AVD you have to do it. You kind of have to do it that way. Well, Windows 365 is best practice using Microsoft hosted network. And blimey, it is quick. If you want to download something, that goes down quick. Yeah, that rapid scaling, which we'll see a little bit later from yourself, I think is kind of like where the meat is and where you can do quite a lot of really cool things. Sorry.
So some of the use cases for AVD, again, some of this based on sort of our experience as well, but the use cases tend to be more the sort of enterprise organizations that I see. So those that require sort of high levels of automation, as I said, integration with an existing Azure ecosystem. Perhaps you've got multiple line of business apps deployed, so they're on virtual networks that you want to integrate with, that sort of stuff. But also usage with other cost options, so things like reservations, savings plans, your existing subscriptions, those sorts of aspects as well. Again, use cases as well as the obvious use case of providing virtual desktops to end users. Things like business continuity planning. So, we need something we can spin up if our office can't be accessed. So sort of pandemic type scenarios. Disaster recovery as well, obviously comes into play there. High-end graphics, obviously you can build Azure virtual machines with very capable graphics capability in now, providing that to end users so they can do things like CAD, and those sorts of activities, but also combining that with things like very fast performance storage in Azure. You give someone who's working with CAD a very fast machine that has a very powerful graphics card, combine that with some very powerful storage to put their CAD files. It's a really great solution for them. Also, one of the
a flight simulator with it once or something like that.
I have seen a demo. It's worth a quick online search just to see. I think Flight Simulator on AVD is impressive, to say the least. But also a mixed approach of apps and desktops. So perhaps you don't need to get a whole desktop down to a specific user or group of users. You just need to stream one application. Well, that's perfectly possible in AVD as well. So moving on from sort of the kind of the what, we're now into the why of why would you use code-driven deployment, and that's kind of really the sort of the purpose of myself and John both coming here today, is to talk about why would you actually do this. It's very easy in tech to talk about, hey, this is amazing, you should look at this, but why would you actually do it? What problems does it solve? So when we talk about code-driven deployment, we're effectively talking about infrastructure as code to build the sort of the background infrastructure and the elements we need to deploy these types of environments. So infrastructure as code is a method of managing and provisioning resources via code. So whereas we perhaps point a mouse at a portal and click, or use some sort of interface, we can actually now define that as code using various different tooling. Obviously, once something is defined in code, it's repeatable. It's also very scalable. A lot of those variables, a lot of those values in that code define X number of items, or deployment to X number of regions, as an example. We can start to build that out and scale it. Very easy to share. So they're all very, very small files. You could quite easily email those. You could put them in some sort of repository system to make that easy to control. It's usually a JSON file with imperative or declarative code. So imperative being, please do this, declarative being, please build this, and often integrated into version control systems. So for example, a little later on, I'll share how I save some of my code, sort of community things I work on in GitHub. So you can edit them, edit infrastructure as code files as well, using most common tools and platforms. So things like GitHub, Visual Studio Code, you might use Azure DevOps. There's lots of different tooling out there you could use to do that. It's also worth pointing out, not always, but usually it's adopted as part of a wider DevOps strategy. So perhaps we'd like to do a full application or a full environment deployment using this type of methodology. So that's usually where infrastructure as code becomes a small part of that as well. Something I like to talk about because I think it's important, but infrastructure as code, has a benefit cycle with it, really. The fact it's repeatable increases the speed of deployment, or the fact that it's repeatable and template based minimizes the risk. The fact that we reduce risk means we're more consistent in what we do. It's more reliable than ClickOps, clicking around in portals and that sort of things. We can write once, we can deploy many times. And that makes it easier to duplicate, which makes it more repeatable. There's lots of these benefits, and this is just a small subset of those. But you can see how one tends to sort of progress into another, and so on and so forth. What tooling is required to do this? So we've talked about why you would use code-driven deployment, but how would we actually do it? So there's a few things we're going to talk about today. Other tools are available. This is just a small subset, but this is what we are using to sort of demonstrate the concepts for the two platforms, AVD and Windows 365 today. So two things that I will cover off in a little bit of detail. One is Terraform, and that's to create infrastructure. The other is Packer to create machine images. Also, some of the things we'll demo and show would require Azure CLI and PowerShell to do things like sort of pre-Terraform scripting, tweaks in Azure, and some software installations and Windows 365 deployment, for example. So quick shout out, quick setup if you're new to some of this tooling, but use Chocolatey, makes it really easy. Also have a look at Chocolatey, it's really awesome. I'm just using the community version here, as you can see, but makes it very easy to get VS Code, Terraform, Azure CLI, Packer, and Azure PowerShell just onto a machine to get you started and set up, ready to go. So just some background on some of the tooling. So what is Terraform? So Terraform is an infrastructure as code software tool that can interact with a wide range of platforms and environments, and it does that using providers. So in the case of Azure, there is a provider called the Azure RM provider. Comes in 3 main varieties, so open source, cloud, and enterprise. I'm just using the open source option here. There has been a change to that recently on the licensing front. So if you want to check that out, just go to terraform.io. We're using that to create core infrastructure for AVD in our deployment. So Packer, what is Packer? Again, if you'd like to check it out, packer.io. It's a tool for automating the creation of machine images across a variety of platforms. So why would we use Packer? What's the benefits to doing this? So we can automate the creation of machine images in AWS, Azure, and other platforms as well. There's lots of different platforms we can interact with. It's worth noting as well that machine images does not just mean for VDI. So, in the case of using Packer, you could use that to build an image for servers, for example. We can also install software in an evergreen way, so download latest versions. I'll demo a Packer template a little bit later on just to show you what that looks like. That also includes Chocolatey installing some applications. It's a simple JSON file or HashiCorp language file that you can use to configure that. Again, very easy to deploy, very easy to repeat, and very easy to share. So really, really useful, and provides, critically, this is the most important thing, an image we can deploy from with minimal effort, and we can do that time and time again. Just a few other use cases. So, in the case of Packer, we could use it to deploy, Linux VMs. We could do Ubuntu. We could do Citrix. We could prep a machine ready for then deploying using other Citrix tooling, machine creation services. We could also do Windows Server for infrastructure workload. Perhaps we have agents we need to deploy. We have specific configuration we want to do as part of a build, just to give some examples on that front. Okay, so on to methodologies. So how, what, and why. So for AVD, obviously Terraform would build our infrastructure, Packer would build our images, and then there would be a few tweaks using either CLI, PowerShell, or the portal, whatever you would choose. I tend to, and this I suppose is kind of more of a personal preference, but I like using Terraform to deploy the bulk of the infrastructure. I like using Packer to then build me images that are saved into an Azure Compute Gallery, and then I'll usually go and do the final step either in the CLI or the portal. Just makes it nice and easy for me. John, did you just want to cover off the Windows 365 aspect?
Yeah, it's basically exactly the same, Jake. We just have to do the Terraform infrastructure. What we can do exactly the same. Use Packer to create the image. We actually put it into the same Azure, into the same gallery as you do for the AVD, and it's there ready for Windows 365, ready for your provisioning policy. And then when you're in the provisioning policy, select the image that you want, and you're ready to go with it. So exactly the same.
Nice and easy.
Especially, do you know what's really good with this, Jake? In my opinion, is that if you have a mixed environment of Windows 365 and AVD, which there's definitely use cases out there to have a mixed environment. Is you've done your own image for AVD. It's there for Windows 365. So for me, that's brilliant.
Yeah, keep things easy. So just a quick overview of the AVD aspect. So as I said, Terraform would be used to provision the infrastructure. That's things like resource groups, virtual networks, subnets, NSGs, storage, profiles if you're using them, for example. Perhaps you've got some application packages, also compute galleries and other resources to support perhaps line of business apps or similar. Packer would then do the machine images, so that would be the actual image, so the OS, the version of the OS pulled from a gallery, and then any customization or applications we need in it. Then finally, as a last step, we'd use the CLI, PowerShell, or portal to do some of those tweaks. As I said, for myself, in most of my work, I'll use Terraform to do the bulk of the infrastructure work. Packer will build me the images, and then usually it's just a case of provisioning a few desktops, either in the portal or the CLI, whatever's easier. Once you get comfortable with this type of process, you'll find that it actually becomes very, very quick to do these. What's really nice as well is we can make changes in isolation. So for example, I need a new version of my image. I can redeploy the Packer element of the process, perhaps an updated version, perhaps a change to an application, and then I could spin up a testing host pool or something similar. Again, as John said, for Windows 365, again, Packer's doing the images, so the image, any apps, any tweaks we need, and then it would be CLI, PowerShell, portal, whatever you want to use to do the final steps there, really.
All there, ready to go. Love it.
So I'm just going to cover off in a little bit of detail now some of the AVD deployment aspects, and then we'll move into Windows 365 with John. So in terms of actual deployment for AVD, obviously going back a couple of slides, there's a few things we need. We need that infrastructure in place first, which I'm sure you'll all obviously know, as we've mentioned it multiple times in the PowerPoint so far. But effectively, we need to do that Terraform process first before we move into the Packer process and before we move into the latter stages of our deployment. So obviously, we need to run Terraform, and our Terraform is actually a number of files. They're known as TF files because they have the extension TF, and they define that infrastructure and the configuration that we want Terraform to apply. At the time of running those files, they're analyzed by Terraform, and then they're turned into an execution plan to apply our changes. So for example, those files will define our resource groups, our virtual networks, our subnets, NSGs, all of the stuff that we need as background before we can deploy AVD. I'm just going to seamlessly switch screens now, so bear with me 2 seconds. And I just want to demonstrate a piece of Terraform code just to show what it looks like and give you a practical example of that. Okay, hopefully my VS Code screen is showing now. Yep, excellent, cool. So apologies, this is slightly small. I'll just make the text a bit larger if I can. So there we go. Hopefully that's a bit easy to read now. So this is just a.
You got one more.
One more, yeah, no worries. Sorry.
I can't see it. There we go.
Okay. Cool. Well, thank you. So yeah, really just to show you an example of some Terraform here. So this is a base lab environment I've created. It's available in my GitHub. I'll pop a link into the chat shortly just to show that. But effectively what I'm doing here is just creating a very, very basic Azure environment. So you can see I'm starting with some resource groups. I'm just going to highlight this section. You can see I've got a resource here, Azure RM_resource group. I'm just calling it base lab v2, and then I'm using a variable for the code that I'm working in, and then calling this resource group identity. You can see the location is based on a variable as well, and that variable is region 1. And I'm also adding a few tags. You can see one of those is also based on a variable. So one of the things I really like about Terraform is that this is easy to read. You know, once you start to get comfortable with Terraform, you can look at this, understand what it's doing, and start to get a good idea of what you're actually deploying. Just a quick overview, and I appreciate this is a little bit of a whistle-stop tour because there's quite a long file here to get through, but you can see I'm creating a number of resource groups, so 3 resource groups here, and then moving into a key vault. So I'm actually creating a random ID to use for the name, so it's unique. And then I'm starting to build out a key vault here using Azure RM_key vault. Again, you can see I'm placing this just as an example in a resource group called RGSec, and that's one of the resource groups here that I've created. So here's RGSec as an example. We've also got things then, I'm actually creating a password, so I'm creating a random password. So again, really good example here of just building security into my deployment. I'm having that password randomly generated at the time of deployment, and I could go away, deploy this 30 different times. Really good example of how Terraform, you know, allows you to build some of that security in from the outset. I'm then moving on to networks. So you can see here, I'm actually starting to build virtual networks. I'm using a function called CIDR subnet here to actually split a variable that defines a CIDR range and actually split that up so I can use that with my VNets. Again, another really useful way to get Terraform to do some of that hard work for me. I'm then building out a number of subnets, quite a few in here, as you can see, but basically just getting Terraform to build those out for me so that I have them. Keeps it nice and simple. Doing virtual network peering as well, makes it nice and easy. Using a data item to go and grab my IP address, and then I'm popping that in an NSG here, as you can see. So in this case, only where I deploy this from can access the virtual machine. Building a number of NSGs, associating those NSGs to subnets, again, very straightforward to do in Terraform. Building out some random IDs for DNS addresses, public IPs, network cards. And I appreciate me sort of scrolling through this is very much a whistle-stop tour, but hopefully this just gives you an idea of, you know, building out an Azure environment in Terraform is very simple, very straightforward, and we can do it in a very sort of structured and easy to use method. I can look at this, I know what's happening, I know what's going on. And I'm not suggesting, you know, start with a very large environment where you're building lots out like this. Start small, build a couple of resource groups, build a number of VNets, you know, start with 1 or 2, put a couple of subnets in. And with Terraform, the great thing is you can start in a building block approach. So start with a resource group, check it deploys, add a VNet, check it deploys, and move forward in that method. So here, for example, I'm just putting some disks, building out an availability set, building out some virtual machines. So this is giving me all of the background elements I need to actually move forward and deploy that Terraform environment to Azure. I'll just stop sharing there, and I'm just going to switch back to PowerPoint. Cool. Hopefully that's showing up okay now. So that was just a quick example of Terraform. As I say, towards the end, I'll put a link in the chat to where you can download a copy of that repo. Hopefully that'll be useful to anyone who wants to have a look and learn. And that example I have just shown is available to download and use as you wish. So Packer, let's just move on to that quickly. So Packer obviously is a JSON file that defines the builder settings we'll be using. It also includes a provisioners section. This is really important. This is where I'm actually using Chocolatey to install a number of applications. So that could be apps, it could be customizations, it could be a script that runs to do something unique to your build, your business, whatever that may be. Packer then actually runs that build process once we trigger it and builds our custom image. Apologies, be another seamless switch here. I'm just going to make this a little larger so it's easier to read. Cool, and hopefully you'll be able to see a Packer template now. So what I'm actually showing here is a Windows 11 21H2 Pro Packer build file that I'm using, something I've just set up to do some basic testing with. And this actually uses Chocolatey just to put 7-zip and FSLogix on the machine, and then it just runs a sysprep for me, so it's ready to go. So what you'll see here is the builder I'm using is the Azure ARM builder. Some information here to add some of the secret values, so client ID, secret, and subscription. Obviously, those are commented out here. When I actually deploy this using Azure DevOps, I'll do a token replacement, so those aren't saved in a repo. We define the managed image resource group, so this is where we want our image to be saved, and we want the name here, Packer Win11 21H2 Pro. We're then actually going off, and anybody who's familiar with pulling images from galleries in Azure, that sort of stuff, will recognize that we're obviously pulling the publisher of Microsoft Windows Desktop, Windows 11, and the SKU is Windows 11 21H2 Pro. Communication, again, WinRM is what Packer's using here. We're adding some tags. We have a build resource group name, and we can actually define the VM size that Packer will use to build as well. Now, I should note, this is a fairly minimalistic file. I've kept it very simple because I just use it to deploy environments quickly and that sort of stuff. There are lots of options you can add to this file to customize it as you need. So I'd recommend having a look at the Packer website. There's a reference guide you can follow that goes through all of that and just sort of, shows you what you can add and what you need to add. So obviously mandatory elements and optional elements as well. Here you can see I've got a provisioners section, so I'm using PowerShell. I'm actually using Chocolatey just to I firstly install Chocolatey and then just install a couple of applications. But this, I'm using Chocolatey because it makes it easy. This is a file I use for demos, but this very easily could be going off to an internal repo you have, triggering perhaps another product you use to install apps, anything like that. As long as you can script it using a language that's supported, then you can do that in Packer. I then have a restart, so post application installs, give the VM a reboot, make sure that's all cleaned up, no installer still running, and then I'm just running a sysprep so that machine is then ready to be used for AVD, for whatever it may be that I want to do with it, Windows 365 as well, for example. So I'll just do another seamless switch. And hopefully you can see PowerPoint again. Cool. So I've just done two very quick whistle-stop tours of some code. Again, apologies for the speed of that, but quite a lot to get through. I will share some links to those a little later on, just so you've got that. And if you want to download those and have a go, please do feel free. And if you get challenges, please reach out. More than happy to assist where I can. But how do we pull this all together? So what's the process for us to bring this all together and actually make it work? So this diagram really is how I recommend starting. This is a local example. We're going to do all our work on a single machine. So, for example, me deploying to my lab environment or doing something for a demo environment, that sort of process. So we do all the work on a single machine. We create, modify our code, probably save that into a local folder on that machine. We'd run Terraform and Packer manually. We'd create infrastructure, create the images, and then we're ready to go. Now, the challenge here is that in the business world, running this on one machine puts a dependency on A, that machine, and B, the person who has that laptop or something like that. If that gets lost, damaged, or whatever it may be, it's not the best position to be in. So great for learning, great for demos, great for labs, but probably in a production world, you want something a little more enterprise. So this is just an example using Azure DevOps. So perhaps you'd have multiple people working on the code as well. I might be working on building infrastructure. One of my colleagues might be working on Packer templates, just as an example. So that could all be saved into Azure DevOps repos. We've got a central place where we're storing that code. We then use pipelines to actually go and deploy that infrastructure. Obviously, in the case of Terraform, we would need the state file in somewhere like Azure Storage. We could use Terraform Cloud as another example. But in this case, those pipelines would run that deployment for us, create our infrastructure, and we'd have that central place where we could store everything. Obviously, the same would apply using something like GitHub. We could use GitHub Actions to do that as well. So there's this is where it starts to become more, around different tooling and preference and what you're comfortable working with. There's lots of different ways you could approach this section. What I would recommend for anybody starting out on a sort of learning journey, start with a local example. Keep it nice and simple, work on your machine, work with local tools, get comfortable in modifying the code, and actually just use that as your starting point. So obviously I've been through some of that code. I'll pop some links in the chat in a second, but I'll hand over to John for Windows 365.
Cool. Yeah, I was trying to get the demo going in the background, like not the demo. So I'm gonna do a bit of a half one now, and just a couple of tips and stuff around Windows 365. So let me just share my screen. And we'll go from there. I think this is it. Nope, it's not. So I'm just trying to look at the small little share screen. I think we're there. Yeah, we're cool. Okay, cool. So when it comes to Windows 365, there's something I really do recommend, and it's something called Graph X-Ray. Graph X-Ray is a tool that's been created by Merrill, who works within, I think, the identity team over at Microsoft. Really, really good guy. And this tool's brilliant. So basically, let's look at the description. It views any context-sensitive PowerShell commands that's in the need to change that. The now Entra ID portal, and anything that uses Graph X-Ray uses Graph. It takes that out, takes the PowerShell out, and shows you exactly what you've done. So basically, when you do anything within that, you can just pull it straight out, copy and paste it, and it's a plugin for Edge. So all you need to do is go to the Edge store here, go to Edge add-ons, look up Graph X-Ray, install it. Once it's installed, you'll see this little button up here, and it's clickable, but it doesn't do much. What we need to do is get to over here, go to more tools, go to developer. It does pop something out, but it doesn't show you much. Go to developer, and when we go into Intune now, on the right-hand side, we can see Graph X-Ray, and you can see just by bringing up Intune.com, it just pulls up everything that's happened in the background. So I'm going to clear the session as we go. So if I go over to devices on the left-hand side and go down to Windows 365, on the right-hand side, you can see it's starting to pull through things now. I'm going to clear it again. Yeah, I'm going to clear it again. And as you can see, yeah, look, you can see it's bringing out some Microsoft beta modules all the way through down here. But what we can do, if I go to user settings, for example, on the right-hand side, if I create some user settings, so these user settings could be local admin, can't spell today, for Windows 365, enable local admin, enable my users to reset their cloud PCs, and allow users to initiate restore service every 12 hours. If I press next on that and press assignments, do you know what I like about this, Jake? It's coding by ClickOps, isn't it? Like you're using ClickOps to then get code.
But it's so powerful because it brings the parallels together, you know, for someone perhaps who would like to move to the code way of you know, doing this deployment. This bridges the gap.
Yeah, 100%. So someone like me who doesn't like coding, or who's not very good at coding, this is absolutely perfect. If my Hintune portal was actually working, it's quite slow for some reason. Let's try that again. I think I'm having a bit of trouble with the Intune portal today. Okay, let's go again. So Windows admin PC for Windows 365, create a local admin, and we'll do all the tick options, press next. There we go. We're going to get something today. Isn't it great when you do a demo and it doesn't work very well? There we go. So if I select a group, which I want it to be, I'll just go to any group, the top one, and press next, and then press create. On the right-hand side, we will be able to see everything that's just been created within a PowerShell. So it's got the module there, and it's got the everything else within there. So what I quite like is what I could do now is literally just copy and paste that into ISE, VS Code, whatever, and yeah, VS Code, and start to build out a PowerShell script by stuff that we've done using ClickOps. And then what's really nice with that now is I can now make this customizable. So if I wanted something for it to just create another one, for example, and just go user PC, and then just press false, or type false, obviously I can just change that really easily, and then that ClickOps is no more. I now have my I now have my code. I can now start to actually just change the parameters within this file, within the script, and we're good to go. And again, so that was just for like the user settings on the user settings. I'm gonna delete that. That was just for the user settings. But what we can start to do, if Intune starts to play ball, it must know that we're doing a demo. What a weird one. And go to provisioning policies. If I now want to start to create a provisioning policy, again, we can do let's do a Windows 365 frontline policy. We'll give it a frontline, and we will go. I've never done a Windows 365 like frontline whilst trying to do this code, so I don't know what's going to happen, but you know, we're going to go for it. We're going to see what happens. Also, I noticed my license for frontline isn't there anymore, so yeah. So we're going to use Microsoft Entra Join. We're not going to do the Microsoft hybrid Microsoft Entra Join. We're going to use a Microsoft hosted network. As we kind of said earlier, if I've got an ANC, if I've got my own landing zone, I connect to the landing zone. I'm going to use the Microsoft hosted network, and we're going to go United Kingdom. Location just goes automatic, and I'm going to enable single sign-on. Using Packer earlier, or quite a while back now, we created our own image. Oh my God, it is slow today, Jake. Very slow today. I don't know if it's I'm using a Windows 365 PC, but there. Windows 11 22H2's there. We can click that if we want. Yeah, we'll click that. Why don't we go just full demo on that? So we can also do our gallery images, or we can do a custom image. We can select United Kingdom. We won't do a Cloud PC naming policy because that will take a little bit too long. We can set auto patch or nothing for updating the PCs. We can select our group, which I'm not going to do right now, and then press create. It'll go off, it'll create that policy, and then right down at the bottom again, we can see that I've now got a script to do exactly what we have just done. So for me, if you're a consultant or someone who's going to be creating these, who's going to be doing Windows 365 consistently for a lot of customers, or if you want to just do it for post-project documentation or something like that, it's really easy to get all the parameters out and stuff. It's even just good for documentation, in my opinion, as well, because it gives you a clear exact of what you've created. And as you can see here, everything I've done, Windows 365 frontline policy. I can see it's a shared provisioning type. I didn't know what it's going to say actually, but I didn't know if it was going to say frontline, but it's a shared provisioning type. We can see it's not a managed desktop. Azure AD join, so they haven't actually changed that in the background yet. We can see the regions, United Kingdom, and everything that we've created is all in there. And again, very easy to manage, very easy to update if we wanted to create more, or if we needed to change any kind of like naming conventions and stuff like that, or any settings, any regions, all easy to do. And that again is using Graph X-Ray, which is a Microsoft Edge add-on, and I can't recommend that enough, really.
I suppose what's really nice as well is you could take all of this, save it in a Git repo somewhere, have a reference point you could use to do another deployment. And also as a, I often find this myself, I'll do something, I'll come back to do the same thing a few months later, and I have to have a bit of a refresher on, what I was doing. And this really helps with that. It gives you that sort of point in time, snapshot of what was going on, what you deployed.
Yeah, 100%. Yeah, 100%. It's, again, there's other things that you can do it with as well. So anything within Azure AD or Enter ID, as it's called now. So even if it's just creating groups for people that were doing that type of stuff, or creating users and stuff like that, it's really easy to just rinse and repeat some like repetitive stuff, to be fair. So again, really, really recommend it. So say even if you had like a automated task to create a group or create new users and stuff like that, it's really good to get everything out of the back of that.
Yeah, and I suppose, even thinking, from sort of business process, new person joins organization, process is triggered, spin them up a PC. All of that sort of stuff can be automated. Yeah, very, very powerful.
100%. So yeah, that was kind of a bit of a blast through Graph X-Ray. I was going to try spin something up really quickly, but that will fail probably because it's a live demo. But yeah, it's a really good way of doing it. Cool. Right, let me stop sharing. How are we doing for time? We've got 9 minutes.
Yeah, we're all good. Just one more slide to share that's got some resources on, so I'll just share that quickly. Hopefully that's it's nice and nicely readable. Was a bit worried that was going to be too small, but yeah, hopefully this presentation's certainly been helpful, in terms of giving an overview of some of the tooling, some of the methods you can use. As a starting point, I'd recommend perhaps have a look at some of these GitHub repos. Have a look at some of the tooling we've mentioned, just to get a bit of an understanding of where you could start. But also, I've added a link to a few of my blogs if you're interested in some of the AVD things, some of the Packer things I've talked about. There's some guides on there as well. But also, if you have challenges, feel free. I'm sure John won't mind me saying, but we're both very open to people reaching out, asking questions. That's what the community's for. So please do that. And hope you've enjoyed the presentation. Thank you.
Awesome. Lovely to do it again with you, Jake.
Pleasure as always. Thanks, John.
Hey guys. All right. Thank you very much for your time. A great presentation. Kept me on my toes with the changes of screens. So I think they went well though. Really great to see some of the ways that you can deploy AVD and Windows 365, through those through code driven design. So that's really a cool thing to be able to dive into. Well, if you do, if you do want to share in the private chat that link to the repo, I can get it into the YouTube comments.
Oh yes, I will do that now.
Can have that as well. But yeah, thanks. Thank you very much for your presentation today. And yeah, there we go. And let me copy that over. get that into the comments so everybody has it.
Yeah, it's a very it's an interesting area because it's one of those where you could spend hours talking about different methodologies and ways to go. So yeah, apologies to anyone watching thinking this has been a real whistle-stop tour, but there's a lot to get through in the time. But hopefully these resources will help, and some of the background will cement those methodologies. Thank you.
Great overview. I appreciate it. Well, you kind of gave the how, the what, the why, and the and the follow through to it all. So no, perfect. And yeah, I'm getting all this into the comments section before I stop the stream, so that everybody should be able to see it. Even if they're watching this on demand, they'll be able to find all those links. So
awesome. Thank you.
Great. Well, again, thank you guys for your session. Appreciate it, and enjoy the rest of your day. Everybody else, will join us in 5 minutes. We'll have another great session around this great thing that Derek Smith does as my co-organizer. He handles the schedule, and he always does these theme type days. So today is a very code driven day. So we're gonna be doing some more code. More infrastructure as code type presenting in the next session as well. So thank you, Jake. Thank you, John. And everybody else, have a great rest of your day, and see you soon.
Thank you. Cheers.
Bye-bye.